There are plenty of footpaths hereabouts, and it's just as well that I can knows the last postman to deliver the mail on foot to the outlying farms in this district. And she also knows about the hazards of a country postman's life.
Dogs were quite a problem. You know, they would always go for the postman. I got quite a number of tooth marks all over my hands, been bitten by dogs at various times. And there was one dog, he just would not allow you to face him. He'd bite you. And one day I met him, there's nobody at home, and I walked all the way to the farm to the door backwards, and I thought, he's not going to bite me. So I bent down to put the letter through the box, and he bit me bottom.
You were really a kind of social service in a way, weren't you?
Oh yes, because an awful lot of people weren't able to use a telephone. Many of them were totally illiterate. I used to write letters for them, answer them, write their checks out for them, and all sorts of little things. But it was very sad when the area became motorised. But they don't get their mail any earlier than what they did when we were doing the by-foot training.
She walked 15 miles a day, 6 days a week in all weathers, a trusted confidant, a friend, a welcome sight coming up the mountain path. This was the last flour mill in the valley. The wheel stopped turning in 1960 when the miller retired. Since then, nothing has been touched. It's as if the work stopped only yesterday. The miller is in his 90s now, and his memory has a very long reach.
In the beginning, I remember there was quite a few farms had donkeys, and it was quite a few old women used to come with a donkey and a sack of corn. In those days, time didn't seem to matter. Because a farmer would come here and he'd be here for hours.
And how did the farmers pay you in the early days?
Oh, all told, they called it. We took about 10 pounds of grain for 100. What we had as toll, we fed to the pigs and hens and things and sold it. That was the only way we got cash.
So your grandfather worked this mill?
Yes.
And your father?
Yes.
And then you?
Yes, yes. But my grandfather, I say, he was a bit of a rebel, and he left the family and went to China on a sailing ship, and he was away for 2 years. He came back and settled down all right.
Do you sometimes come back just to look at the old machinery?
Oh, yes, yes. Well, the funny thing, any dreams I have in the night, they're about this area, never about where I live in town.
You dream about the mill?
Yes, always about the mill.
Such country mills were built to handle modest cartloads of grain, not great lorry loads. It was modernisation, the growth in transport capacity, that stopped the wheel turning and ended the miller's way of life. But as any farmer would tell you, it's only town folk who think the countryside doesn't change. Don't worry, 007, I won't give the game away. But what a disguise. A priestly heron patrols his parish. How curious to find in this middle-of-nowhere meadow a commemorative urn. It was put here to mark the visits of Dr. Samuel Johnson, the great man of letters, and praises him in flowery words. This spot was often dignified by the presence of Samuel Johnson, whose moral writings, exactly conformable to the precepts of Christianity, give ardour to virtue. Well, they don't make words like that anymore. Dr. Johnson came here with his companion, Mrs. Hester Thrale, and visited Colonel Middleton's house at Gwynonnog, up on the hill.
In 1774, Dr. Johnson and his old friend, Mrs. Thrale, came to visit Gwynonnog, and they were on a tour of Wales.
Now, Dr. Johnson was a cantankerous old man at times. What did he think of this place?
Well, he thought very well of it. He described the food as being good, and the company was good, so they were very happy here.
But the good doctor couldn't help creating a stir wherever he went, and one incident is still remembered at Gwynonnog.
The gardener was summoned to bring in a live hare, and this was to be for dinner. And Dr. Johnson was very intrigued by this hare, and he asked to hold it. And it was a live hare, and so he stroked it, and he had it in his arms for some time, and he kept Colonel Middleton talking about how wonderful it was to see wildlife and to be able to hold this hare. And bit by bit he was making his way towards the window, and just as Colonel Middleton thought that he would hand the hare back to the gardener to take to the kitchen to be cooked, Dr. Johnson pushed it through this window, and Colonel Middleton was furious because he had deprived them of a delicacy.
But good old Dr. Johnson.
Good old Dr. Johnson, definitely.
A marvellous tapestry of lupins fills the kitchen garden behind the house. It's a warm Welsh afternoon filled with flowers and the faint hum of bees. The sort of afternoon in which time itself seems to run more lazily. This is the recreation of the Victorian garden that Beatrix Potter knew when she came to stay and to paint the illustrations for the Peter Rabbit books that captured the hearts of generations of children. The top window of the potting shed is just like that of Mr. McGregor's shed in the tale of the Flopsy Bunnies. And this, you'll agree, is the paddock where Mrs. Flopsy Bunny came looking for her lost children.
Beatrix Potter came to stay with her aunt and uncle, Harriet and Frederick Burton, from 1895 through to 1913. And during her stays here, her summer stays and spring stays here at Gwenynog, she took many illustrations, not only of the countryside, the kitchen garden, the furniture of the house, and later she used, in 1909, the illustrations from the kitchen garden for the tale of the Flopsy Bunnies.
And is the garden today still plagued with rabbits?
Yes, we have rabbits, but we don't make rabbit pie.
Well, they couldn't really, could they? It's a lovely cornfield path now, descending gently towards Denby, but we'll skirt the town, aiming for those hills on the far side. Now here's a pretty Elizabethan cottage, and you'll not be surprised that it has something to say for itself. Perhaps it was something in the air. Mr. and Mrs. Middleton, who lived here in Elizabethan times, produced a crop of 9 sons, who all became business tycoons. Most successful was Thomas. Everything he touched turned to gold. He made fortunes out of India and the new American colonies. And in the end, he became Lord Mayor of London. Now we're on the Dr. Johnson trail again. The doctor's companion, Mrs. Thrale, had remarried and was now Mrs. Piozzi. She had a daughter called Cecilia. And the man who lived in this house, John Mostyn, fell madly for her. And no wonder, Cecilia was a girl and a half, attractive, adventurous, and used to getting her own way, and an heiress. And John Mostyn flirted for all he was worth.
He was a few years older than Cecilia, but her mother deemed him to be totally inappropriate as a son-in-law, and decided to take Cecilia away from his influence and plunge her into London society to forget this hayseed. They set off for London, and Mostyn trailed them, and they spent the first night on this journey back at Shrewsbury. Mostyn managed to, in the best traditions, with ladders, extricated Cecilia from the bedroom, and off they went to Gretna Green, where presumably they were married, but and both lots had then to tramp back to Denby and make the best of what Mrs. Piozzi clearly thought was a very bad lot.
If looks could kill, Mrs. Piozzi was furious. Anyway, the couple started married life on her money, but worse was to come.
Her daughter was quite happy to share the sexual gratification requirements of Mr. Mostyn with her personal maid. But Mrs. Piozzi got very incensed when she came and found both the maid and her daughter in the same state of pregnancy, and insisted that Mostyn set up the pregnant maid in a house in Denbigh.
The scandalous Cecilia stayed on in the family home. Mrs. Piozzi called it all a wasp's nest. After 10 years, Mr. Mostyn died, and Cecilia brought up her children and built a beautiful walled garden, a gem in the Sublime Valley.